You cannot sit there, read these chapters, and tell me with a straight face that this is the absolute pinnacle of early cinema. I mean, are you joking?
I am completely serious.
It is a soap opera. It's an absolute soap opera dressed up in some fancy lighting.
Look, hear me out. Visually, it is properly genius. You are completely ignoring the historical context of what they were physically doing with the cameras. We are talking about an absolute masterclass in...
Wait, hold on a second. I am not ignoring anything. I'm looking at the actual plot of the thing.
But the plot isn't the...
Look, you're listening to this right now, so let me pull you directly into this, because we've been arguing about this for the better part of an hour before we even hit record.
Going in circles, really.
Literally in circles. We are tearing into this massive, frankly exhausting piece of historical analysis today. It's
Cinema, the magic vehicle, a comprehensive guide. Journey 1, 1913 to 1950.
Brilliant text.
sure, if you like textbooks. But there is this one specific film the text is just absolutely obsessed with. Variety. Or, Variete, if you want to be properly pretentious about it.
It's a German film. That is the actual title.
Right, whatever.
Yeah.
Directed by Ewald Andre Dupont. What year was it again? 1924?
1925.
1925.
Thank you.
Ewald Andre Dupont. So here is the question I want to pose to you, the listener, right up front.
It's a loaded question, I'm sure.
No, it's a fair question. If a film has genuinely game-changing visuals, right? Like if it practically invents a brand new way of physically moving a camera through space.
Which it absolutely did.
Right, but if the storyline itself is complete and utter trashy rubbish, is it actually a masterpiece?
Yeah.
Or is it just a massive fluke by an arrogant director who got incredibly lucky with a brilliant technical crew?
It is not a fluke. I mean, you can't be serious. It is a proper masterpiece, and calling it trashy is just, it's wildly reductive.
It's accurate.
No, you have to understand the landscape of 1925.
Yeah.
The text lays this out perfectly, but you have to actually read between the lines of what was happening in Germany at the time.
Oh, here we go.
No, seriously, the entire German cinema school in the early 1920s was coming to this massive crashing. You had this huge tectonic shift happening in the medium.
Uh-huh.
The era of demonic expressionism. Films like Waxworks, which the book says was really the last outstanding gasp of that style, that was dying out. And simultaneously, you had the demise of Kammerspiel.
Right, which for anyone who hasn't spent 3 years in a film studies seminar is what exactly? Intimate theater, basically.
Exactly, yeah. Kammerspiel translates to chamber play.
Right.
It was this intensely intimate, very psychological, heavily theatrical style of cinema. Stripped down sets, usually focusing on the working class, very few title cards, just pure claustrophobic emotion.
This is thrilling.
It was.
Yeah.
So you had these two massive pillars of German cinema, right? The wild, distorted, terrifying angles of expressionism and the suffocating intimacy of Kammerspiel.
Okay, and Variety was the bridge. It was this highly intelligent summing up of the formal visual achievements of the Expressionists, but moving the emotional core toward a completely realistic-minded era. It's absolutely brilliant how Dupont synthesized the two.
Hold on a second. You can't be serious.
I am.
It is not an intelligent summing up. It's just them realizing people wanted real human beings on screen, not demons.
That's a massive oversimplification.
Look at the reality of the era. You're talking about 1925 in the Weimar Republic. The historical context isn't some elevated academic exercise. It was visceral.
I agree. It was visceral.
We are talking about hyperinflation that wiped out life savings, political assassinations, the absolute lack of electricity, the smog. The whole place was a shambles.
Yes, and that is exactly why.
Cinema back then was basically a circus tent. It was an amusement ground. People went to get out of the cold.
Which is exactly the setting of the film. That's not a coincidence.
Yeah.
But you're treating it like it's high art. The medium's limitations back then were a prison. You had directors stuck in these freezing cold studios, rationing power, trying to film guys in heavy makeup, playing ghosts and sleepwalkers and vampires.
Because that's what the artistic movement was.
Because that's all the lighting and the public trauma would allow. That whole demonic expressionism era, it was like a bad Halloween funhouse.
Oh, that's rubbish, mate.
They literally painted shadows onto the sets because they didn't have the lights to cast real ones.
Yeah.
Dupont only moved to the so-called realism because the old style was getting laughable. The public was sick of it. The novelty of the funhouse wore off.
That is such a cynical way to look at it, and frankly, it completely misunderstands the mechanics of art.
How so?
Because those limitations weren't a prison, they were a playground for directors like Dupont. Think about what Expressionism actually was.
Painted shadows.
No, it wasn't just spooky ghosts. It was the externalization of internal trauma. Germany had just lost a devastating world war. Millions of men came back physically and psychologically mangled. The distorted sets of the cabinet of Dr. Caligari or Waxworks looked like that because that is what the world felt like to a traumatized populace.
But by 1925, they were exhausted by it.
Yes, the audiences in the mid-20s were desperate. They were living in that post-war grit, dealing with the smog and the hunger, but that meant they were desperate for a way to process their reality.
By going to a circus tent.
By seeking out a medium that the daily newspapers simply couldn't provide. Newspapers gave them statistics about inflation. Cinema gave them a new way to feel.
Okay.
Expressionism gave them psychological terror, yes. But variety gave them raw, recognizable, sweaty human emotion, elevated by that very same expressionist technique.
They didn't want elevated emotion, mate. They wanted a cheap distraction. You say the era was a playground, but the source material literally describes the origins of cinema as a circus tent.
Yes, as a metaphor for the spectacle.
People were paying a few pfennigs just to get out of the freezing Berlin winter. You're giving Ewald André Dupont way too much credit for synthesizing anything. Do you even know what he did before he made movies?
Yes, he was a newspaper columnist.
Exactly. He was a film critic and a journalist. He wasn't some high art philosopher sitting in a tower.
No one is saying he was in a tower.
He was a guy who knew what sold cheap papers on the street corner, and he figured out what would sell cinema tickets. Sensationalism. Sex. Murder.
Which is exactly why he was the perfect person to make this film.
I'll come off it.
No, listen, the source material explicitly points this out. It's not a true, pure Kammerspiel film, but it is a direct continuation of the psychological achievements seen in films like F.W. Murnau's The Last Laugh.
The Last Laugh is completely different.
It defies easy classification, that's the point. Dupont understood the audience because he was a journalist. He knew exactly how to communicate the gritty reality of the street, but he had the absolute genius to use the visual vocabulary of the avant-garde to do it.
Or he just hired a good cameraman.
That is why it's a masterpiece. He took a tabloid story and filmed it like a painting.
A masterpiece of a bad Halloween funhouse transitioning into reality TV, maybe?
Reality TV? You've got to be joking.
I'm not. I mean, let's actually look at what dragged people into this circus tent. Let's look at the actual story. Because if the audiences wanted real people, Dupont definitely gave them reality. But he gave them a spectacularly messy, trashy reality.
It's human reality.
Let's break down the plot, because you listening to this, you need to know what we're actually talking about here. It is based on Felix Hollander's novel, Der Eid des Stephenhuller.
Excellent pronunciation.
Thanks. Now, Emil Jannings, who is a massive, massive international star at this point, plays this bloke named Boss Haller.
A profoundly tragic, broken character.
Tragic. Hold on. Let me lay out what this tragic character actually does for you. Haller is a former trapeze artist, right?
Yes.
He suffered an injury, so he can't fly anymore. But he's running this incredibly dodgy show at an amusement ground offering, and I quote directly from the text, erotic sensations.
It was the Weimar Republic. That was the cultural milieu.
It's sleaze.
You had the cabaret culture. You had immense poverty driving people into sex work. You had a complete loosening of Victorian morals. The erotic sensations tent isn't just a sleazy detail.
It's pretty sleazy.
It is a vital piece of world building. It establishes how far this man has fallen from the high-flying prestige of the trapeze.
Right, so he's running a depressing, dodgy tent in a dirty carnival.
Yes.
Then he meets Berta Marie, played by Leah Deputy. She's this young, beautiful, completely naive provincial girl who wants to be a dancer.
And she becomes his muse.
Muse. What does our so-called tragic hero do? He completely loses his head. He abandons his devoted wife, played by Melly Delschaft, and he totally abandons his young son, and he runs away with this young girl.
It's a story of profound human failing. It's about midlife desperation.
It's the plot of a daytime soap, a really bad one. They run off, they train, they somehow become top-tier trapeze artists together.
Because he was a master before his injury.
Fine, sure. And then they get engaged by this famous, aristocratic acrobat Art Nelly, played by Warwick Ward.
A fantastic performance, by the way.
They form a trio at the Wintergarten Theater in Berlin. The Wintergarten was the venue. They do this massive, highly dangerous stunt, the Salto Mortal, which becomes a huge public sensation.
The physical tension in those scenes is incredible.
But then, Shock horror. The hot, famous acrobat Art Nelli seduces the young Berta Marie. Huller finds out, gets intensely jealous of the mess he entirely created himself, murders Art Nelli in cold blood.
Yes.
And the entire film is actually just a framing device of him telling this story to a prison warden while serving a 10-year sentence.
Exactly. It's told from police files. The framing device is brilliant. It's developed in a completely realistic, matter-of-fact manner.
That's rubbish, mate. It's a trashy reality TV show.
How can you compare it to reality TV?
Think about the actual mechanics of the story. Older, depressed guy leaves his wife and young kid for a younger dancer. They start a sensational stunt act. She inevitably cheats on him with the hotter, richer acrobat, and the older guy kills him.
You're stripping away all the nuance.
Do you reckon you'd feel genuine sympathy for this bloke if you were on the jury? Because I wouldn't. The text tries to say the film isn't trivial or superficial, but the plot absolutely is. It's a tabloid headline.
No, it is not trivial. You are deliberately stripping away the execution. Yes, if you read a one-paragraph police file plot summary, it sounds like cheap melodrama.
Because it is.
But you cannot divorce the text from the subtext. The source material specifically notes that when a melodramatic plot is brought to the screen by a sensitive director, which DuPont absolutely was, the result is thoughtful and incredibly simple.
Simple is one word for it.
It's a primal story about guilt, lust, and power dynamics. DuPont's characters are completely credible, and their actions are psychologically justified.
Justified.
The way Jannings portrays the inner turmoil, the crushing, suffocating weight of his own terrible decisions, it is spot on. It is a masterclass in internal acting.
He ran a tent of erotic sensations and then he murdered a bloke. How's that justified?
Which is exactly why his fall is so compelling. Look at the psychology of it. Huller is a man who deals in cheap thrills. He runs an amusement ground tent.
Exactly.
He thinks he understands the absolute baser instincts of humanity because he profits off them every single night. And yet, he is completely, utterly destroyed by his own baser instincts.
Well, he shouldn't have abandoned his kid then.
He believes he is the master of his domain, the boss, but he cannot control his sheer lust for Berta Marie. And he cannot control his violent, possessive jealousy when Artonelli takes her from him. It is a moral trap.
A trap he built himself.
Exactly, and DuPont executes it without the heavy-handed theatrical symbolism of his predecessors. Look at earlier German directors like Lupu Pick or Leopold Jussner.
Okay, what about them?
If they had directed this exact same script, the film would be full of over-the-top static symbolism. They would have had Jannings walking down a literal staircase of skulls to symbolize his descent into sin.
That honestly sounds pretty cool.
But DuPont strips all of that external baggage away. The actions are justified strictly by the psychology of the characters, not by some external, heavy-handed theatrical force. You understand why he murders Artonelli, even if you condemn him for it.
You keep using the word justified. He left his kid to run off to the circus.
Psychologically justified within the narrative framework of his character's profound flaws.
That is a lot of big words to defend a deadbeat dad.
The film isn't asking you to acquit him of murder. It's asking you to deeply understand the agonizing, shoddy, sweaty reality of his life. And that is where the true brilliance of the film lies.
Look.
Because even if you despise the plot, even if you think Color is a completely unsympathetic git, you have to look at how that trashy plot was physically captured on film. Because the technical wizardry at play here is absolutely undeniable.
Okay, fine. I will concede that the camera work is bloody impressive.
Thank you.
But let's not pretend Yval-André Dupont was sitting there in the director's chair inventing the physics of lenses. He had an absolute dream team working for him. A total fluke of timing.
Oh, here's that word again.
He was a fluke. You're talking about photography by Karl Freund, Karl Hoffman, and Eugen Schifftan.
Three of the greatest, most innovative cinematographers in the entire history of the medium.
Right. And what they did was fundamentally change how a movie looks. They completely abandoned the static backgrounds. They abandoned that high contrast, painted shadow, highly theatrical lighting of the Expressionist era.
Yes, exactly.
The sources talk about how they created this impression of newsreel realism and freehand sketching with the camera.
Which was revolutionary. Let's actually unpack what that means. Okay. Because freehand sketching sounds like a polite artistic choice, but in 1925, it was a brutal physical undertaking.
Yeah, they didn't have Steadicams.
You have to picture these massive, heavy, wooden cameras of the 1920s. They weren't iPhones. They were giant boxes on heavy wooden tripods, and they had to be hand-cranked by the operator just to expose the film.
Right.
They weighed an absolute ton. To achieve freehand sketching meant Carl Freund was literally strapping this massive rig to his chest or mounting it on a trapeze.
Wait. They literally mounted it on the trapeze?
Yes, they put the camera in motion. It wasn't just sitting in the 10th row recording a stage play anymore. The camera became an active, breathing participant in the scene.
Okay, that is pretty impressive.
Freund would swing with the camera to capture the vertigo, the actual physical dynamism of the images, transmitting the actual physical quality of movement to the audience. When Haller looks down from the trapeze, the camera is Haller looking down.
Yeah, especially during the trapeze acts at the Winter Garden. I'll admit, the way they explore the space through variable lighting, it does actually sum up the emotions without needing title cards to tell you how to feel.
See? You do get it.
I didn't say it looked bad. And we have to talk about Eugen Shifton here.
Yeah.
Because this is where the how of this film gets absolutely fascinating.
The Shifton process.
Yes. Because you're looking at this film, and the Winter Garden Theater looks massive. It looks like it holds thousands of people. The scope is epic.
It looks like a proper arena.
Right. But they didn't have the budget or the lighting power to actually build and light a stadium-sized set. So Shifton invents this incredibly clever optical illusion.
It's brilliant.
He places a mirror at a 45-degree angle in front of the camera lens. Off to the side, he has a tiny, beautifully detailed miniature model of the massive theater ceiling and the upper balconies.
And the mirror reflects that miniature into the camera lens.
But, and here's the genius part, he scrapes away the silver on the back of the mirror exactly where the live actors and the trapeze rig are standing on the actual much smaller set.
So the camera shoots through the scraped away clear glass to see the real actors swinging on the ropes, while the rest of the mirror reflects the miniature stadium around them.
Exactly. It perfectly, seamlessly blends a live-action foreground with a miniature background, all in camera, in 1925.
It's astounding.
It is optical physics at its absolute finest. It's the exact same trick Peter Jackson used to make hobbits look small in Lord of the Rings, invented 75 years earlier for a movie about a jealous acrobat.
And that technical brilliance wasn't just for show, it was in service of the psychology. There's a very specific detail about how DuPont and Freund handled Emil Jannings that I think proves DuPont's genius as a director.
Well, because Jannings, for all his massive international star power, was a total ham.
He was very expressive, yes.
He had a huge, almost uncontrollable tendency for theatrical exaggeration.
He was a stage actor at heart, yes. He was used to performing for the back row of a massive auditorium.
A stage actor who loved throwing his arms around, gnashing his teeth, and pulling these massive, distorted faces.
Which was the style of the time.
On stage, that's great. On a 30-foot silver screen, you look absolutely deranged. So what did the camera do? It actively thwarted him. The texts point out that they specifically positioned the camera to shoot Jannings from behind his shoulders. They focused on his body language, or significant little details like his hands clenching or the sweat on his neck.
Exact.
Just to physically stop him from overacting directly into the lens, they literally had to hide their lead actor's face to keep the realism intact.
And it's a brilliant directorial choice. That is not a fluke. That is a director profoundly understanding the medium of film versus the medium of theater.
Or just a director who couldn't control his lead actor.
No, by focusing on the body language, the slump of his shoulders, the tension in his back as he watches his lover flirt with another man. DuPont and Freund communicated the subjective internal views of the characters far more effectively than a theatrical grimace ever could.
I mean, sure, it worked for those scenes.
They also used associative editing, double exposures. They skillfully drew on the legacy of the French avant-garde, using optical effects like patches of light on dark backgrounds.
Okay, let's unpack associative editing really quickly, because that's a fancy term.
It's the psychological juxtaposition of images. Instead of just showing you exactly what is happening in linear time, you edit two contrasting shots together to create a new meaning in the viewer's brain.
Like the Kuleshov effect stuff.
Yes, you show a shot of a man's angry face, then you cut to a shot of a roaring tiger, then back to the man. You associate the man with the predatory rage of the tiger.
Right.
In Variety, they used it to explore psychological space in a way that had never really been done in commercial German cinema. The rapid-fire cuts during the trapeze acts.
But hold on, we have to talk about the flaws here, because it's dodgy in places.
How is it dodgy? The acrobatic sequence is legendary.
Because the source material literally says the extreme close-ups of the actors' faces are wildly out of tune with the rest of the film's realism.
Well, out of tune is a subjective critique.
You just praised DuPont for hiding Janning's face, but then in other scenes, he does the exact opposite. One minute it's high art, the camera is gracefully tracking a trapeze artist through this beautifully constructed Shifton miniature.
Yes.
And the next, it's a giant, sweaty, overacted face completely filling the screen. It's totally inconsistent. The text points out this massive flaw. The extreme close-ups just clash entirely with the innovatory newsreel style of the majority of the scenes.
I wouldn't call it a massive flaw.
You get these beautifully sketched general shots of the public at the Winter Garden, and then bam, a giant theatrical face out of nowhere, breaking the reality.
But you have to look at why they were doing it, what they were trying to achieve with the editing in those specific moments.
Because they couldn't help themselves.
No, those rapid-fire cuts you see, especially in the acrobatics, going from a wide shot of the fall to an extreme close-up of a terrified eye. It wasn't just a fancy edit they threw in for fun. It was mathematically designed to make your physical heart mimic the rhythm of a steam engine. It's mental.
Wait, a steam engine?
Yes. The Industrial Revolution, the mechanization of the modern world, they were trying to induce physical panic in the audience. They were inventing this kind of highly aggressive associative editing on the fly, trying to make the audience feel the adrenaline, the danger, the sheer altitude of the salto mortale.
That sounds like a stretch to excuse bad editing.
It's not an excuse. So yes, maybe an extreme close-up feels out of tune to a modern eye or even to the critic who wrote our source material, but you absolutely cannot deny the sheer ambition of trying to physically fuse realism with psychological subjectivity. They were trying to make you feel the vertigo in your stomach.
Ambition doesn't mean it worked perfectly. A few good cuts and a clever mirror trick don't fix the out-of-tune close-ups, and they certainly don't fix the fact that the director himself was deeply, fundamentally flawed.
Oh, come on.
Which brings me to the massive elephant in the room about why this film is a one-hit wonder, a total fluke.
A fluke? I genuinely cannot believe you are still using that word after everything we've just discussed about the camera physics.
I am using it because if the directing was so revolutionary, what happened to the great Ewald Andre DuPont?
He had a long career.
Because the text tracks his career after Variety. The incredibly famous producer Eric Palmer moves on. DuPont gets a massive ego boost and goes off to London. And what does he try to do?
He continues to explore similar themes.
He tries to reproduce this exact same success. He basically tries to make the exact same movie. He makes Moulin Rouge in 1928 and Piccadilly in 1929, films on very similar subjects: nightclubs, jealousy, show business.
And they're both fascinating films in their own right. He recreated the exact staging, the incredibly detailed way he conducted the actors, picking up significant details of their wardrobe.
But he failed.
Yeah.
He fell off the map. Because, as the source text explicitly points out, his disregard for the quality of the plot remains a mystery.
That's just one historian's opinion.
See, he was just an arrogant git who didn't care about the story. He thought he could just point a clever camera at a trashy, shoddy plot, use some fancy mirrors, and get away with it forever.
You're completely dismissing his visual genius.
But then, the absolute death knell for guys like him happened. Sound pictures came in. The narrative style of the entire world changed overnight.
Well, the transition to sound ruined a lot of careers, not just his.
Because people actually had to listen to the rubbish script. They couldn't just be distracted by a swinging camera anymore. Because with early sound, the cameras had to be locked inside these massive, soundproof wooden boxes so the microphones wouldn't pick up the noise of the gears grinding.
The ice boxes, yes.
Right. So suddenly, the camera couldn't fly on a trapeze anymore. It was bolted to the floor.
Yeah.
And when the camera stopped moving, the audience was left with DuPont's writing.
It was a difficult transition.
And his failure to adapt to that new reality completely precluded him from ever repeating his early successes. It proves my point. Variety was heavily reliant on Carl Freund's moving camera and Shifton's mirrors, not DuPont's overall genius. Take away the visual gimmicks, and he had nothing to say.
You can't be serious. You are judging a pioneer of silent visual storytelling because he couldn't instantly adapt to an entirely new technological medium 10 years later.
I'm judging him because he couldn't tell a good story without a flying camera.
That is incredibly unfair. That does not invalidate the masterpiece he created in 1925. He gave us the visual vocabulary that defined an entire era of cinema.
Did he, though?
Yes. You want to talk about legacy? Variety stands as one of the single best cinematic portrayals of the shoddiness and agony of circus life ever put to film. It created a ripple effect that touched undisputed geniuses.
Geniuses who actually knew how to structure a narrative plot.
Geniuses who studied DuPont. The text specifically lists them. It directly inspired Charlie Chaplin's The Circus.
Fine.
It inspired Ingmar Bergman's great film Sawdust and Tinsel. Bergman, the undisputed master of psychological cinema. You are sitting here calling a film that directly inspired Ingmar Bergman a fluke.
I'm just saying.
And the book also mentions Victor Sjöström's He Who Gets Slapped. Ah.
Which is brilliant, by the way. I'm so glad you brought that up.
Why?
Because our beloved source text literally lists He Who Gets Slapped as coming out in 1924. How on earth does a 1925 film inspire a 1924 film? The author of the text is having a laugh. It's a massive historical anachronism right there in the book.
Okay, yes.
If they can't even get the dates right, why should we trust their analysis that DuPont was a genius?
Okay, yes. The 1924 date for Sjöström is clearly an anachronism in the text's timeline of influence. That is a factual error by the author.
Pretty big one.
But let's actually look at why that error exists, because it speaks to a much larger truth about the era. Sjöström wasn't directly inspired by a film made a year later. He was operating in a parallel thematic exploration.
So it's just a coincidence.
No, it's the zeitgeist. It is the cultural atmosphere of the 1920s. Think about what the circus represented to the post-World War I world.
A place to get cheap thrills.
It is a place of extreme physical danger, rigid hierarchy, masks, illusions, and people performing agonizing physical feats just to survive while a crowd watches and cheers. Sound familiar?
It sounds like a metaphor you're reaching for.
It was the perfect, terrifying metaphor for Europe in the 1920s. Multiple artists, Sjöström in America, DuPont in Germany, were hitting on the exact same metaphor at the exact same time because it was in the air.
Right.
But that doesn't negate the Chaplin connection or the Bergman connection that came decades later. The point the author is trying to make, despite the date error, is that Variety crystallized this theme better than anyone else.
I disagree.
It perfected the visual representation of the agony behind the curtain, the sweat, the intense jealousy, the grime beneath the glamour. Bergman saw that, Chaplin saw that. They recognized the absolute genius of what DuPont and his cinematographers achieved.
No, they recognized a really cool visual trick, and they stole it for films that actually had decent stories.
That is so cynical.
That's what great artists do. They steal from the mediocre ones. DuPont was a one-trick pony. He had Carl Freund doing the heavy lifting by strapping a camera to his chest. He had a trashy, sensationalist story that appealed to the lowest common denominator of a traumatized audience.
You're refusing to see the whole picture.
And when the novelty wore off and sound technology demanded actual narrative rigor, he faded away into obscurity. Variety is a beautifully wrapped, technically stunning, completely empty box.
It is not an empty box. It is the foundation of modern visual storytelling. You were sitting here a century later demanding a 21st century narrative sensibility from a silent film that was actively, aggressively trying to figure out how a physical camera could capture a human soul.
That's a bit dramatic.
You call it a fluke, but the associative editing, the thwarting of the actor's theatricality, the variable lighting, the shift in process, those aren't accidents.
I didn't say they were accidents. I said they were gimmicks.
They are deliberate, highly intelligent, grueling, artistic choices that move the entire medium of film forward. It is a monumental piece of cinematic history, and it absolutely demands respect.
And I'm saying it's the lazy enthusiast's idea of a masterpiece.
Oh, whatever.
It is. It's the kind of film you praise in a film studies class because the camera moves nicely, completely ignoring the fact that the story is a daytime soap shambles and the director didn't even care about the plot.
You're impossible.
But look, we are never going to agree on this. I think he got incredibly lucky with his crew. You think he's a visionary who changed the world?
Because the historical and technical evidence points to vision.
The evidence points to a guy who essentially invented reality TV before TV even existed. But here's the final thought I want to leave you with you. Listening to us argue in circles for the last hour.
Yes, think about the legacy.
It's a provocative question that this whole debate really hinges on. Think about it tonight. If a piece of art inspires undisputed geniuses like Charlie Chaplin and Ingmar Bergman, does it actually matter if the creator himself was a one-trick pony who completely failed to adapt to the future?
He wasn't a pony, he was a pioneer.
Is true influence about creating a flawless, perfect piece of art from start to finish? Or is it just about providing a single, unforgettable visual trick for much better artists to eventually steal?
That is entirely the wrong question.
If you want to stop being a lazy enthusiast and actually dig into the historical grit for yourself, you know what to do. Go track down the source material, Cinema, the Magic Vehicle, read up on 1920s Berlin, see if you can spot the genius or if you just see the trash.